Hello again. This is a video about violin sound. If you probably noticed that most electric violins have a fairly soft sound, quite fizzy sometimes at the top end. They're not as bright and cutting as an acoustic violin. You know, particularly the bridge is quite a soft instrument, as you might have seen on my Sycorax review. Which is fine if you want that sort of sound, if you're using a lot of effects, as I tend to do, or you're playing slow, dark music. Sometimes that's a sound you quite like. So, and it is a useful sound. But sometimes you want something more acoustic sounding, and it just doesn't quite cut it. Maybe it doesn't cut through the rest of a band, or it's just a bit dull. And obviously there are several answers to this. The first answer is, of course, to take an acoustic violin with you. That's the obvious solution. Probably the best if you want to. But you may not want to take your fabulously expensive acoustic violin to a pub where there are guitarists and drummers and all sorts of kit and crowds and things. The other option is to get the Violorama Sycorax violin, which is an electric violin, so it's quite robust. You can take it into a pub. It has a nice woody acoustic sound. It's a good solution to that problem as well. But suppose you want both sounds in a gig, or maybe you can't afford the Sycorax because you've just bought a GT-1000 and those things aren't cheap. What do you do then? Well, I have a solution for you. At least a part of a good... Yeah, I have a solution for you. And it involves impulse responses. I was tipped off for this by Sean Leffler on Twitter, who's doing something very similar, but with very different equipment. I think he's either using a laptop or maybe a different pedal, I'm not sure. So he found a company called 3 Sigma, and they sell acoustic violin impulse responses. They've got 2 violins on there, a viola and a cello, as well as several guitars and things, all sorts of other stuff. And I thought this sounded interesting. They're quite cheap, they're $10 each. What's not to like? So I thought, can I load those into my GT-1000? It seems you can. I'm not going to go into detail about how impulse responses work. To be brutally honest, I'm not sure I really understand them myself. Briefly, what happens is they sample a real life instrument, usually a guitar cab or a reverb, and then they give you a WAV file which you can then load into some software. Convolution reverbs are ones you might have seen. Also, cab impulses responses are quite common for guitarists. So we're going to use them in that sort of context. Although we're not emulating a cab, we're going to pretend to the GT-1000 that it is. Once you've downloaded the impulse responses from the 3 Sigma website and paid them a small amount of money, you need to download them onto the GT-1000. That's quite easy. There's a thing called the IR Loader, which is on the Boss website. You can download that file, that program. It's quite easy to use. You just connect up the USB to the GT-1000, run the program, and then select the impulse responses you want to load. You're allowed 4, and you can call them whatever you like. Name them helpfully so that when you get onto the device itself, you know what they are. So I've called them Italian 1A, Italian 1C, French 1A, French 1C, so I know which is which, because I've been trying the 2 violins. There are also cello and viola ones there, which I haven't tried, but might be interesting for an example if you're using an octave violin. Just a thought. Once you've got them onto the device, they look like this. You go to the master output here, page across, and there you've got them. Italian 1C, 1A, French 1C, 1A, and then these are all the built-in ones, which are obviously actual cabinet types, and then off. So, I got one there. sound any different, does it? Okay, it's a cabinet impulse response that this thing is expecting, and you can't plug a violin into a cabinet, so you need to have an amp. This is slightly annoying because I don't really want an amp. Amps do things to violins that I generally don't like, or particularly emulated ones. So you need to, but you need an amp. So needs must. We go over to here. I have an amp. Now there are several amps. The best one here is one called Transparent, as you can see here. And I set the gain quite low and the level quite high. So the gain is low so that you don't get overdrive. I'm desperately trying to avoid overdrive. There's also some EQ things here. Now what I recommend you do is, once you've got your amp, that's the amp with the, well, you've got your amp, what I recommend you do is turn off the impulse response and then go back to the amp and set it up so that when you press the button to turn it on, it sounds the same as it does without, or as near as you can get it. Now you won't get it exactly the same. Just play with the EQs on the amp and get it as near as you can. So I think that's pretty close. Mainly it's a question of level matching, so that the levels don't change when you switch the amp on. And I think I've got that quite nice. You will need to use some EQ later, but it's better if you do that much now, so that you've got a baseline to work from when you start adding the impulse responses. So now we turn the impulse response back on. And my favourite here is the Italian 1A. Now we should have which I think you'll agree is quite a lot nicer than it had before. Certainly more acoustic sound. Doesn't have that fizz at the top end. It's a bit brighter and crisper. I think success. I'm actually really pleased with that. Once you've done that basic thing there, I do recommend. I've got another EQ3 here. I've got a few bits, just small corrections, just to make it a bit nicer. Nice. Put a bit of reverb on that. That's the Italian 1A. The C ones are a bit darker. You don't quite get the high end that you get on that one. So if I show you the Italian 1C, you'll see. darker, if that's what you want. That's the option. And it comes with the Italian violin, so you get both options. The French 1A I find a bit like a honk in the middle. Slightly honky in the middle, and the C is slightly even honkier. But sometimes, if that's what you want, that's what it is. Generally I find the Italian much nicer. And you can put your effects on those. I do recommend you use a stomp box for the amp. Then you can carry that stomp box over onto different effects, presets on the GT-1000. I mentioned stomp boxes when I did my previous video on the GT-1000, so remember that, use the stomp boxes, they're very good. And also very important to remember that when you switch the amp off, your impulse response goes off as well. What I do here is I've got the amp and the EQ3 on the same foot switch, so that pressing the foot switch turns them both off and on at the same time. That's relatively easy to do. If you don't know how to do that, I've got the amp 1 on the main control function there, and on the assign I've got the EQ3 on there, so you can do two things at once. But hopefully you already know how to do that. Because the amp is a clean thing, in theory it doesn't matter whereabouts in the chain you put it. As you've seen there, I've put it before the master delay and reverb. I put it there really just in case, because it does colour the sound slightly, and I'd rather any coloration happens before I put my reverbs and delays on. That's sort of a matter of taste. The impulse seems to go after all the effects, so you can't control where that is. That's part of the master. It's as if you've put them in the effects loop of your cab and amp. So that's not an option to change, annoyingly. The impulse response has to go on the master output. Sadly you can't put it on the sub. I don't think if you put it on the master it also applies to the sub. I haven't actually checked that, it just literally just occurred to me, so that's worth finding out. It doesn't particularly bother me because I very rarely use the sub. I use it for recording, in which case I generally want a subset of the signal, so I put it in the middle for recording loops separately and things like that. The other thing is you need to have the output set to recording. If it's set to line/phones, you do not get the options to put the impulse responses in. So if you find you don't have that option on the master, what you need to do, so if you go to the master, it needs to be set to recording. If that's set to line phones, it's not going to work. I fell foul of that the first time I tried this, wondering why is it not there? So that is how to make your fizzy soft electric violin sound that little bit more acoustic. I hope that's been helpful or at least interesting. Thanks for watching this video. See you next time. Bye.